Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rebecca George, BCS President, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first virtual Karen Spärck Jones lecture, which also happens to be the lecture's 10th anniversary. This lecture is held in honour of Karen Spärck Jones, one of the most remarkable women in computer science. A fellow of the British Academy, she had a long, rich and remarkable career as a pioneer of information science from the very early days of computing. BCS holds this annual lecture so that we can continue to honour women in computing research. Women still only account for 20% of IT specialists. BCS is committed to making IT good for society. Therefore, it is our responsibility as the professional body of IT to ensure the chartered professionals in our industry are representative and diverse, especially as the future talent pipeline emerges. The format is slightly different this year in that we have a panel of 3 speakers who will all talk individually about their areas of research. They will then all join a panel together where you will be able to ask questions. After my introduction, the session will be facilitated by Professor Carron Shankland. Karen is Professor of Computing Science at Stirling University. She's also chair of the BCS Women in Computing Research Group, who have historically organised this event, though it's now been taken under the wing of the BCS Awards panel. So now I would like to introduce our 3 speakers. Professor Angela Sasse, who will be our first speaker. Angela is the Professor of Human-Centered Security at Ruhr University, Bochum in Germany, all of which I have pronounced really badly. Angela, I apologise, you can correct me later. And she's also in the Department of Computer Science at UCL. Before starting her research and teaching career at UCL in 1990, she obtained an MSc in Occupational Psychology from Sheffield University and a PhD in Computer Science from Birmingham University. Since the late 1990s, her research has focused on human behaviour in IT. And in 1999, she co-authored the most cited paper on the topic, Users Are Not the Enemy, with her then student, Anne Adams. She was the founding director of the UK Research Institute for Socio-Technical Cybersecurity from 2012 to 2017 and is a fellow of the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT and the Royal Academy of Engineering. Angela will be followed by our second speaker, Dr. Jessica Enright. Jess is a lecturer in computing science at the University of Glasgow. Her main research interests were in graph theory and network epidemiology, but she's also a big fan of combinational games. I'm sure this has been done deliberately to test my ability to speak these long words. After a theoretical PhD on algorithmic graph theory at the University of Alberta, she branched out to practical epidemiology and now spends time working between the practical and the theoretical. During the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, she has been contributing to network modelling of disease spread and control on a variety of different projects. And Jess will be followed by our third and final speaker, Dame Wendy Hall. Wendy is a Regius Professor of Computer Science, Associate Vice President, International Engagement, and is an Executive Director of the Web Science Institute at the University of Southampton. She became a Dame Commander of the British Empire in the 2009 UK New Year's Honour List and is Fellow of the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering. Dame Wendy was co-chair of the UK Government's AI Review, which was published in October 2017, and is the first skills champion for AI in the UK. In May 2020, she was appointed as chair of the Ada Lovelace Institute. I hope you enjoy the session. Do please ask questions, and I'm now going to hand over to Karen.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. So welcome to this first of our new way of formatting the Karen Spärck Jones lecture. I understand we've got people here at all stages of their interest in computer science and in their careers. So we have talks first. what I'm going to do is run all of the talks one after the other. If you've got questions for the speakers, then you can put those in the Q&A, but we'll also do a more general panel at the end on which can be on any topic that you'd like to ask them about. First of all, I'd like to hand over to Angela to tell us about her work in human-centred security. Angela.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour around the research that I've been doing for the past 20 years. And I want to explain what I think is the biggest problem in cybersecurity today. You know, we hear about cybersecurity, about breaches every day and read about this in the press. But I think one of the areas that's really been overlooked is that we have some significant design problems, and they are at the bottom of a lot of the problems that we hear about every day. One of the most famous people in cybersecurity, whether it's academia or also research, is this gentleman called Schneier. His publisher describes him as the nearest thing IT security has to a rock star. And so his opinion, of course, carries a lot of weight. So he has a PhD, you know, he's a cryptographer by training, but he also worked in practice for a long time. And so when he says something like he says here, people often represent the weakest link in the security chain and are chronically responsible for the failure of security systems. You can imagine that this is, you know, this actually is reflecting the attitude that the whole profession really has. And I think this is actually something that's really done enormous damage to the whole area. What you're seeing today is that this meme is being repeated over and over again. You know, you hear it from people selling security solutions, you hear it from policymakers and government, that really, yeah, you know, it's people who are the problem in security. And I think this cartoon actually summarizes it really rather neatly. Is, you know, we, the technology people, are creating all these fantastic stuff, firewalls, encryption, antivirus, and then you've got this guy in the right-hand corner there, you know, human error, you know, he makes mistakes, and that's really what's wrong with it, you know. And you just have to have a look at the way that person looks to like go like, you know, he doesn't look like he's super fit, right, or super bright or something like that. And that really is, you know, how people in this scenario are being described. And I think that it's a very fundamental misconception. I call it the ground zero, from which all the problems I'm going to give you a quick whirlwind tour of really spring. Our behavior, that people's behavior in security is just wrong, and that we need to fix the human in order to fix the security problem. Yeah? That's why, you know, if people are the weakest link, that's where the problem is. So we have to fix people. But what my research has shown, going as far back, this paper was published over 20 years ago, where I sort of, as a usability person working in computer science, ended up sliding sort of sideways into security because somebody asked me to do a study, and Adams and I did that, you know, and literally the brief for the study was, why can't these stupid users remember their passwords? And as a usability person, my answer was, well, because you're asking them to do something that's humanly impossible. You know, nobody can handle between 16 and 64 different passwords, you know, of length, and, you know, and it is still 20 years later a problem to get through that this is not something you can fix with training. You know, when you're asking people to do something that is just not possible for them to achieve, you know. it's taken, however, it took 15 years, nearly over 15 years for you can trace this back to a policy that came from the US National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which basically said that in order to be acceptable, a password had to be of a certain length, you know, and you've all been told these rules, you know, you must have like upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and yeah, over 15 years after making those recommendations, the man who created them, his name is Billy Burr, actually admitted in a Wall Street Journal interview, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." And you know, all the mental gymnastics that people around the world have been put through were really based on a misconception. And he now says, "I'm sorry, it's just not possible to do this." And you know, the behavior we're seeing as a result is because people can't cope with what I ask them to do. And thankfully in the UK, we do have a national technical authority that's very interested, or certainly became interested about 8-9 years ago, into what researchers in the UK were doing. And I was one of, my area was one of the ones picked up, and they are now in their recommendations, in their policy, very clearly stating that you can't dump all the work that has to do with authentication on the end users, and that when you're creating a system, you must make authentication for legitimate users something that's actually easy to do. So even ENISA, the European Network Agency, has more recently gotten onto this, you know, and started to say, like, you know, yes, you know, that it may involve some skill-based training and support, but you may also change the security practices and policies so they actually fit with how people think and work, rather than stopping them dead in their tracks all the way. Now, this is really, it's not new, you know, and in the UK actually has a fantastic tradition of what we call socio-technical systems thinking, which started with Enid Mumford in you know, was very, very prominent in the 80s, Peter Shankland, and who basically put forward a whole design approach that says, you know, we need to basically design with people in order to create technology that works with people in order to get the best overall performance out of the system. And I would say that in large parts of computer science, that input is very, that has been really taken up. It's very well understood. And it's acted upon, but security is an area which stands out because, well, we can debate this later on. The fact that it's not a particularly diverse area, either in research or in practice, may have something to do with this. So instead of really looking at, you know, how do we actually design security solutions that people really can use and want to use, is we've got impossible tasks, and that really starts to poison the well. You know, the great military strategist Douglas MacArthur said, you know, never give an order that can't be obeyed, because once you do that, people will start, you're giving people license to doubt and query all orders from there on in. And this is the experience that millions of users make with security policies every day. They keep being told, you know, something like you must have this kind of, you know, this kind of password, and then only to experience in their everyday activities that they can't follow them. And so generally people don't really believe securities at all anymore. And also we keep like draining, you know, the solutions, even if it's possible, the solutions we have drained so much productivity because they take so much time and effort, you know. So now we don't just have passwords, you know, usernames and passwords, we have additional things to make things more secure. And to make it even more secure, you can't just type that third factor in, you have to like select character 5, 8, and 11 from a drop-down menu in order to improve this. And it's all a bit like, you know, this ironing board in a hotel that one of my colleagues, Robert Watson, found. In order to stop the iron from being stolen, you're just bolting on a metal plate on it, and now your ironing surface has been reduced by 40%, and it's going to take you 40% longer to get your trousers ironed properly. And we have many, many examples for this. I think particularly egregious are captchas. So these are completely automated Turing tests to tell people and computers apart, allegedly. And you may more recognize them as things that, you know, that you find impossible to actually solve. You know, these are problems. Service providers have problems with attackers creating accounts through bots. And so the service provider has a problem, but they're dumping the workload for managing that problem on all legitimate users. So now billions of people around the world have to prove all the time that they are human in order to be able to access or use a service. And actually in one security company recently, they put this like they've done some research and they found that really captures up by and large not very effective. And what's actually happening is that the attackers just hire lots of low paid people in low economy, you know, in low wage countries to actually solve those things for them. And they are having this neat summarize, you know, Turing in his grave, you know, would be, we've got the exact opposite now, you know, that we're really wasting the time of the legitimate end users, and we're exploiting really low wage people in an economy in order, you know, with this really badly designed security mechanism. The other thing that we keep doing in security is we keep attacking our own users. You know, so here is an example from earlier this year where at the Chicago Tribune, in the name of training their staff against phishing, they send out messages saying you've been awarded a bonus, and then of course if you clicked on it you then got a like, you know, gotcha, wrong. Again, this is an experience many of us are having, you know, on a fairly regular basis. And the reality here is that well-designed phishing messages are really, really hard to distinguish from legitimate ones. And if you don't have a lot of time to go out and research every single of the messages that you get that have an attachment or have a link in it, you will end up clicking on one of those. But it's this whole idea of that we make things more secure by attacking legitimate users. That's just, you know, very, very wrong. I think common sense tells you that, even if you haven't read a book on socio-technical systems. You know, other ideas such as, you know, that people will just learn and change their behavior if you force them to work through mandatory security awareness training. That's, you know, takes up hours and tells you things that you've already tried to do and found you couldn't do. And it's this idea we're seeing sort of like, yes, you know, that people, a lot of the security people talk about psychology and they say like, oh yeah, we can motivate people more, you know, by doing this phishing. We have a trigger event, and by doing that, we make people more receptive for the training that we give them. We're motivating them because they've just experienced that they can't do it. So if we do the training now, you know, they should be really receptive to it. Yeah, but not if it's an impossible task. And BJ Fogg, who came up with this activation threshold, this trigger moment, says very clearly in his model is lots of motivation alone doesn't help you if it's too difficult to do. And that's what we've got. We're also seeing lots of uses of nudging. The Nobel Prize winner in economics, Richard Thaler, is actually not just in security, in other areas, very exasperated with the way that his creation has been used. And he said, like, you know, I didn't say, you know, it was all about constantly like prodding people, reminding them, you know, and ambushing them. People have to, this only works, my nudge idea only works if people have already agreed they want to change their behavior. And you are just reminding them and helping them to make the right choice. But if you want people to do something, make it easy. I think it's that, you know, we've still got a lot of work to do. I think many security issues, when we look at them, are really just bad IT and bad design, you know, and that's why we need computer science, we need software engineering done properly today more than ever. You know, when again legitimate users feel they have to attack the system and hack it, you know, you're just really breeding a very, very bad idea about, you know, about what technology is about and how we should be working with technology. You know, you're creating a bad habit of actually having to attack a system just in order to get the basic functionality out of it that you need. Yeah? Proper software engineering, requirements capture, this ain't, you know, we need to really get back to that. So I want to finish with this slide where my colleagues, Lizzie Coates-Kemp and so on said, it's like, if you're fighting on the inside, you know, if security people and users are fighting, you're just making the attacker's job easier. What we need is a collaborative approach. We need that systems thinking, that socio-technical approach to create security solutions that work for the intended users so they can get to the functionality, they can do their part in keeping a system secure. And I think the specialists really need to get back to that, and then we might be getting better security solutions in the future. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Angela. That's got lots of food for thought. So hopefully to the audience, you're thinking of good questions for Angela. Do put them in the Q&A. And we'll come back to those when we have heard from all of the speakers. And I'd like to move on to now Jess. Jess is going to talk to us about epidemiology.
Yes, I am. Epidemiology, which is a tough one, and it's a word that I used to have to explain what it meant before this year, and I expect now never again, never again. Hi, I'm Jess Enright. I'm really, you can see I'm sort of grinning from ear to ear. I'm really honored to be here tonight, especially once I saw sort of the eminence and accomplishments of my fellow speakers. I was a little bit overwhelmed, had a little, you know, fanned myself, had a little tear in the eye, and then got really excited and made some slides. So what I want to talk about, because I'm just sort of an excitable person, is I really wanted to talk about some of the research I've done, but I want to talk about it as a way of giving examples of some of the things that I've really, at least so far, enjoyed about working in computing, because I'm not one of those people who grew up knowing that she was always going to be a computing person. I started university deciding between physics and biology, pre-med, something like that. And I sort of fell into computing and discovered it as an undergrad and fell in love with it. So I wanted to talk about some of the things really informally that I've enjoyed a lot in the hopes that some of you agree. So as I said, I'm going to be quite informal because that's my style. And these are the three things that I wanted to pick out, right? So the first thing that I wanted to pick out is that zigzagging, at least for me, has been okay, by which I mean changing tack, trying different problems. I really like working on different things in really different ways. And I think computing is a field that lets you do that in a way that other fields might not have let me do that. Relatedly, I found I've done research that I think is kind of fundamental, not in the importance sense necessarily, but in the sense that it's really about sort of theoretical computing things that are, for the moment, mostly constrained in their importance to the insights about computing. But then there's also research that can be done that's helpful. And if you get really lucky, then you can get research that's both research that's really about computing, but also helps your world. And leading on from that, I think computing really does matter and can affect the world in a way that's very real. I used to give a talk to school children, I think about 10 years ago, where I used to have a slide where essentially I was trying to convince them, if you want to change the world and have an impact, take computing, right? I mean, medicine seems good, and certainly, you know, medical professionals are very important. But I think particularly for young people, they sometimes don't realize how much of an importance computing has. Okay, so let's embark. Sorry, give me a wee sec. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about graphs and networks throughout. That's going to be kind of the red thread through this. And I wanted to be clear at the start about what I meant by graphs and networks. I'm going to use the word graph and network interchangeably here. And what I'm really talking about are dots that are connected by lines. Call the dots dots or nodes or vertices, that's fine. And the edges can be arcs or edges or connections, and those are all fine. But what I'm really talking about here are just things that I denote with dots that are connected by some sort of contact. These can describe lots of different systems. They can be sort of a purely mathematical object, and they're important in many ways in that sense. They could also be used to capture a description of a particular system. This is, I believe, a sexual contact network. A lot of epidemiological networks are sexual contact networks because a lot of network epidemiology, so that's the study of diseases on networks, started with sexual networks because they're kind of easy to capture and show really obvious differences in different parts of the network. So in this particular network, these little dots are people and the lines are, shall we say, contacts between them. Okay? But dots and lines, that's what I want you to keep in mind when I'm saying graphs or networks. Okay, so I started my career working really quite theoretically during my PhD. Lots of you will have seen lots of sort of algorithmic graph questions because they're really classic teaching questions. We use them a lot. I picked one out here that I think most people or many people see at some point, and that's the question of I have a graph or a network and I want to know, is there a clique of some particular size? What I mean by a clique is a set of vertices so that they're all pairwise joined up. So a set of vertices in which everyone is connected to everyone else. So this is an example that I have shamelessly stolen from Wikipedia of a brute force search. So that's checking every set of 4 vertices in this graph to see if there's any set of 4 of them that are all joined up. So this sort of theoretical question is really quite important. And there's a whole language of algorithmics and complexity theory that is designed to discuss this kind of question. And I worked on things like this for a good little while. One of them that I enjoy now, that's still quite theoretical, but that I didn't work on them, and it's a similar flavor, is firefighting. Now, I've gone out of full screen because I want to try something here. The idea of the firefighter problem is a question. I have this graph here. Here we go. Some node sets on fire at the beginning. You can see this one is on fire here, up on the upper left. And what I want to do is I want to defend. Let's see the easiest way. Okay, let's have green being defend. I want to defend vertices of this graph so that the graph doesn't all burn down. Now, when I defend a vertex, it stays defended forever and can never catch fire. Once a vertex is burning, it's burning forever. And every time step, the fire is going to spread over all of the connections that it can. So the question is there a way for me to defend this graph so that only, say, 5 things burn or something? So the way that this game goes, here we have the fire started, and say I'm the defender. So I'm going to defend, nope, still white. Oh, no, it's not. There we go. Okay. Excuse my awkward denoting, but let's say this means we've defended this vertex, this little green line here. But now it's the fire's turn. So the fire is going to burn some things. So it can't spread over this. Not very helpful, is it? Give me a moment. There we go. Okay, now we'll do another one. Now the fire can't spread over this connection, but it can spread over this connection. So it's going to spread down here, and that's going to be on fire now. There we go. And now the fire, now I get to defend again. And where am I going to defend? Well, I'm probably going to defend, I don't know, maybe here. Let's make that green defended. Okay, that's defended. Maybe here, I don't know. But I think you see how this game is going to go. Essentially, as the game proceeds, each time I get to defend something, and then the fire gets to spread. And then I get to defend something, and the fire gets to spread. I'm not going to play this whole game out. I'm just going to go back to full screen. But this is quite a fun wee game. So this particular picture I brought with me to a conference on a whiteboard poster so that people could play on it at the conference. It was a really good time. But this question is also notoriously hard from a computational complexity perspective, right? This is one of the fairly rare graph problems where solving this question, can I defend so that only some proportion of this graph burns? This is a hard problem in the sort of formal computational hardness sense for those who are familiar with that language, even on trees, which is wild. It's a really, really hard problem. For those of you who aren't familiar with the sort of computational complexity language that I threw in there, what this just means is it's a really difficult problem to solve. And the only way that we really know of that's consistent to solve it is essentially that brute force approach where we try all the possibilities, which is not generally feasible. Okay, so that's a theoretical question I've worked on, and that I think you might be beginning to see how it's moving towards the study of disease spread. Because after quite a theoretical PhD, and I really enjoyed thinking about these questions that were sort of fundamentally algorithmic, I started working more on practical questions. right? Really about these diseases spreading on networks. Yeah. So what do we have here? We have a network. We have a red disease starting on this network. After one time step, it spreads to all the things that are beside it, and then further, and without any defense or intervention, this disease just spreads over the whole network. Okay, so this is the sort of question that I'm thinking about. And we have lots of examples of diseases spreading on networks. Again, this may be an unnecessary statement to those of you who've survived most of 2020. But previously I worked mostly on livestock diseases. And one of the examples of networks that we had that we know spreads disease is the livestock movement network. So let's talk particularly about maybe the cattle movement network. An enormous amount of data about the cattle and sheep moving around this country. Let me tell you, it's a really exciting data set. Every time a cow moves from one farm to another, or a farm to say a fairground or an auction or a slaughterhouse, all of this is recorded in a great database. And we can trace every animal for its whole life at the end of its life, which is important for food security reasons. Anyway, we have this explicit network of animals moving around from farm to farm, where here the nodes are the farms and the lines are the movements of animals. And we know that this sorts of movements can spread diseases like bovine tuberculosis or foot and mouth disease, for those of you who remember the big foot and mouth disease outbreaks in Britain in the last 20 years. So there's really no argument that understanding how diseases spread on these networks is important to both predict them and to interfere with their spread. So it's quite an important task. Now, I must admit, when I kind of moved from doing purely theoretical stuff to this slightly practical stuff, I did have some colleagues who essentially said, why are you doing this? This is madness, waste of your time. Why did you do a PhD in one thing and then go work on another thing? And I did not say anything to those people because I just did not reply to their email. I had other friends who encouraged me at that point to try something really different and wild, because they were saying that at an early point in an academic career is a good time to try something really different. Because if you discover you like it, then you know you like something else. And if you don't like it, you can go back and no one's really going to say anything about it. I did try it and I did like it. And now I know that I like more things. So I'm glad that I did. Okay, so let's proceed. Given one of these networks, what sort of intervention might we want to do? This question that I found, I think, is one of these really sweet examples of a problem where it turned out to be sort of algorithmically really fundamentally interesting, and also practically quite important. So the question is, if I have one of these networks and I'm going to chop it up by deleting edges, how can I optimally do that, right? If I'm allowed to remove one edge from this graph, what's the best that I can do in terms of limiting the size of the biggest joined up bit that remains? Well, on this graph, if I remove this edge, the biggest possible outbreak is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nodes here. Over here, if I delete 2, I can do a little bit better. This problem is not that bad on this graph, but again, it's formally hard if I want to use that kind of language. And so on a big graph like this one over here, which is so dense you can barely see what's going on in it, this is cattle movements in Scotland from, I think it's 2014 or something, where all the dots are farms that have cows. It's much harder to try and figure out how to solve this problem. So working on this problem in a sort of fundamentally algorithmic way, let me and some collaborators, importantly, including Kitty Meeks, if any of you have heard of her, she was a really important part of this, let us both do something that was really interesting and also practically useful. So really, really a fun experience for me. Now, as I said, previously I worked kind of partway between this theoretical questions and these practical questions, primarily on diseases of livestock. This year has been a bit different, I think, for everyone. It's definitely been a bit different for my research and what I've been doing. Because while I used to only do livestock, now I'm increasingly involved in diseases of humans, one in particular, right? Because I think that if you're a computing person who's involved in epidemiology this year, it's sort of almost your civic duty to help out where you can. And also it's just, very, very interesting to do so. So I've thrown up here an example network that has, I had no role in the making of. It's a network from a particularly, I think, exciting piece of work done by some colleagues at Edinburgh and elsewhere measuring the flow of COVID cases around Scotland throughout the early pandemic in Scotland. The point I want to make about this is that we can definitely measure and model the movement of COVID around in a network sense. And it's really important that we try and figure out which networks are driving this pandemic. Is it the networks that we get from people commuting? Is it the networks that we get just from people living near each other? What sorts of things is it? Those help us understand what kind of interactions are most important. So I've been doing a lot of that this year, and that's been a really strange experience. First of all, some of it falls far more on the helpful side than the fundamental side. A lot of it I think is very useful, but it's not very new computing, but it's a very useful thing to do. The other part of that I wanted to highlight is some interesting work that I think is being done. Sorry, I think it's interesting. It's definitely being done by Anne-Sophie, who's a rather delightful PhD student working again at the University of Edinburgh, looking also at these networks that might be carrying COVID around. She's looking at the comparison between travel to work networks and ferry data networks in the islands of Scotland. These are not as similar as you might think. You might think that if somebody reports, living on Isla and working on Colonsay, well, obviously they're getting the ferry between those two places, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. We've found out there are some places where there are a lot of ferry movements and no reported work movements, and those are probably predominantly tourists. Then there are also some places where we have reported work movements but no reported ferries. So some of those are bridges, but some of them are kind of going via other places on ferries. Anyway, it's a fascinating and difficult computational question, trying to work out which network best describes the patterns of infection that you're seeing. Okay, so I don't want to talk for too long because that's a failing of mine. But I hope that I've shown you some evidence in these particular bits of research, of kind of zigzagging gleefully from theoretical to practical, zigging back into the theoretical from time to time when I can. Research being fundamental and or helpful. So as I said, I think some of my earlier work was more theoretical, and some of my work in the last year has been primarily helpful and maybe not so fundamental. But then sometimes you hit on these really great problems to work on, like that edge deletion question, which are really both. And I think that especially in talking about the work in the last year and the livestock work, I think this is an example of computing mattering in a really fundamental way, partly as a sort of helper discipline in this case, right? That there are things that we've been doing that really couldn't be possible without good software engineering, without computational optimization, without large-scale computing. Okay, I'll stop talking there, but I wanted to mention I'm looking forward to questions first of all, but any that you don't get to, I'm quite friendly, quite happy to chat, as you might have guessed. You can get me by email, or you can find me on Twitter, and I'll reply most of the time to most of those things. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jess. That was great. Really interesting stuff, especially this year, as you say. Okay, so as Jess said, questions on the Q&A. And now we're moving on to our third and final speaker, is Professor Dame Wendy Hall. And Wendy's going to give us a completely different slant.
Hi, am I on? Yep. Okay, fabulous. Thank you, Angela and Jess, for those fabulous presentations. I don't really know what I'm going to say, but I wasn't going to give a technical talk, but I do think Angela's and Jess's talks were very inspiring. And Jess, be careful what you wish for. I used to want people to contact me. I now beg people not to, please, unless only I can answer your question. But and then you have to go through my PA rather. So yeah, be careful what you wish for. But I started out as a mathematician, but in my day, I mean, I'm old, right? So when I did my maths degree in the 70s, there were no computer science degrees, and I loathed computing at university. It was Fortran and paper card and punch tape, and I couldn't see the point of it. I did a pure maths PhD and loved it, but couldn't get a job teaching maths in a university. And I gradually, I haven't got time to tell you the story, moved into computing. in the 80s when the personal computers came out. And in fact, I did an MSc, having done a degree and a PhD. I did a master's part-time at City University in computing to sort of learn that trade as I moved increasingly into that world, and then got the job back at Southampton, did my degrees at Southampton, and I went out, and then I came back again as a computer scientist. So I did an MSc, and my dissertation was on prologue and computers in education. And I look back now and I think, well, I was actually, you know, in those days, prologue and decision, you know, rule-based systems was AI. And also I got interested because I was working at a teacher training college. I got really interested in how computers would help people with education, which what led me into the world of hypermedia and multimedia. But I was in the 80s. It was when that was when we noticed the lack of women in computing. There had been quite a few women before, and I wrote my first paper on the lack of women in computer science with my colleague Jill Lovegrove in 1987. And it's awful that things we're still talking about it today. I wrote a paper about women in AI in 1988 because in those days AI was very much came out of the world of philosophy. And more, it was more an arts subject than a science subject, and many women, in small numbers, but women took degrees in AI in those days as part of philosophy departments work, but more so than they do today. Let's put it like that. It's had a completely different flavor. It was all about, could machines think? Could machines be intelligent? Whereas today AI is more about hard sums. So, you know, the world has changed. I ended up, as I say, I moved into the world of what we call today multimedia. This was in the 80s when it was science fiction to put video on a computer screen. Okay, and the idea that in my lifetime we'd see it all come on these things just didn't really hit in those days. You were using video discs, and you had to write, it was analog video, there was no such thing as digital. You had to write drivers to show it and be able to interact with it on the computer screen. Same with images, there was nothing digital about anything. Speech as well, we had to do all the conversions. And I was told very firmly by a professor in my department that there was no future for me in either computing or at Southampton if I carried on doing this stuff that was nothing to do with computing. Luckily, the head of department saw that this was the future and bought me a video disc player, which also caused displeasure in the rest of the department because that took a lot of the recurrent budget at the time. But anyway, and he sent me on a conference to America to learn to, you know, to rub shoulders with people who were doing this stuff, which is where I met people like Ted Nelson and Douglas Engelbart and all the people that were the leaders at the time. So I was encouraged to carry on, and because this stuff was science fiction, I'm thought of as a pioneer in this world, and part of why I'm saying all this was because all along the way I could have just dropped out of this and gone back to writing, being involved in parallel prologue or compilers, or I don't know where the world, maybe it would have been AI, but as it was then. But I was encouraged by people I trusted who were mentors to stick with my ideas and the vision that I had, and that has led me to where I am today. I had a team of people that I built up over the 90s that designed a system we called Microcosm, which was a PC-based hypermedia system, which was far more sophisticated than the World Wide Web. But it wasn't, because I met Tim Berners-Lee back in 1990, before either the web or Microcosm really were running as systems. So I knew about the web from the very get-go, and our system was really prescient of the semantic web. We had links that resolved depending on the context of the situation or the endpoints of the links, and You know, and in the web, of course, it was a very much it was very, you know, point and go. It was easy, it was distributed, it was open, it was ubiquitous, and that's what made it take off. But it was very simple as a hypermedia system. That was all part of the discussion back in those days. And I don't think any of us realized, even Tim himself, just how much it was going to change the world. And of course, I more and more got into that. I was doing work on the semantic web with Tim and with Nigel Shadbolt, and out of which was semantic, right? Intelligence again. It was all about how you use data to create links to, that the machine can infer. Why is this piece of data connected to that piece of data? You can infer knowledge from that. And that was, you know, that led to the whole knowledge graph movement today. And again, this was very pioneering. And at this time, I suppose in the 90s, I met Karen Spärck Jones. And she became the most, quite a close friend and a mentor who basically encouraged me to stick to the ideas that I had and to follow up with them, and not to be put back by people saying it's this is not interesting, it's not going anywhere, you know, you're not doing anything that's worthwhile. I remember when we had you know, the first REF, it wasn't called REF then, it was had a different acronym. The very first time we did something that was looking at the research paper output from universities back in the early 90s, none of my papers could go forward to it because they were not published in journals or conferences that were recognized by the computing community. Because when you're doing something new, by definition, there's nowhere to publish it that people respect. And it was hard. Now look at me, right? I was just saying before, I'm on the REF panel this year, yet again, judging other people's outputs. And you know, a lot of the submissions will be on this interdisciplinary. They'll be about, you know, image, video, sound, all sorts of things, and all the sorts of things that Jess and Andrew have been talking about. So, you know, I think, I knew Karen. I just want to say something about Karen before I finish, that she's, as Rebecca said, very well respected, but her name is not known. I mean, when you ask people to talk about pioneering women in computing, they'll say Ada. Well, Ada was amazing. And it's wonderful. I first met Ada through the programming language Ada, heard about her there, but there's so many things called after her now, and it's wonderful that she's highlighted. But she isn't the only woman that has been a pioneer in computing. Yeah, people maybe think of Grace Hopper and COBOL and other names for the US, and Angela Maris mentioned Edith, but these are not household names. And Karen Spärck Jones, you know, her work was fundamental to the development of all information retrieval systems, and anything that we do on Google or any of the other search engines or anything to do speech recognition processing, her work is fundamental to it. And so one of my missions is to make the Karen Spärck Jones name even more known far more known than it is now. And it's so wonderful that the BCS and keeps up her legacy, because she died far too young. But I went on, of course, to do another thing. I've always been pushing it at the boundaries. And so Tim and Nigel and I founded Web Science in the mid-2000s, because we realized then that the way the web was evolving was impacting hugely on society, but what society did with it impacted the web. And this was, Facebook started in 2004. We founded Web Science around then, and because we could see all this coming. We could see that there were problems, and Angela, I think, mentioned socio-technical, right? This is all socio-technical. It cannot just be thought of the technical alone, just as the points that you so well made, Angela, about cybersecurity. As my social science friends say, this is all co-created, right? Or they will say co-constituted, in fact. And one of my social science friends gives a great talk about how Tim Berners-Lee didn't create the web. you know, so I'd always used AI, and I'm just going to finish by saying an unexpected, I stopped being dean. I've been head of school and dean, and I didn't want to be a vice chancellor. I wanted to get back to the research, and I still do research in the areas that I'm passionate about. But in 2017, I got a phone call from number 10 Downing Street asking me to co-chair the AI review for the UK government on growing the AI industry in the UK, which I did with Jerome Pesenti. Now, luckily, H comes before P in the alphabet, so it's the Hall-Pesenti report, which, sorry, Jerome, lives in the States, he won't hear this. But that means I think there's a little bit of me that I know will go down in history because of this, because it has been successful for all sorts of reasons I haven't got time to go into. It's led to the it was in the industrial strategy and then a sector deal. We've got an office for AI. We've got an AI council in the UK. We've launched PhD CDTs. We've launched fellowship. We've launched MSCs. We've got the industrial strategy challenge fund, Turing Institute, for National Institute for AI, has all come out of that review. I mean, it's been quite amazing, and there is more to come. There will be another AI strategy going forward somehow in the UK. The OAI and the AI Council are working on the future, the next however many years. And so, you know, there's two things really to finish with. One is I have to put in a plug for my new book, because I've been over COVID with Kieran O'Hara, who was in one of the papers that you cited, Angela, I think. We've written a book called For Internet, which is all about the geopolitical fragmentation of the internet and cyber governance in cyberspace, which will come out in the new year, which I'm really excited about. And at the same time, I've just become chair of the Ada Lovelace Institute because of my interest in AI and ethics. So these are places I never thought I'd end up, and here I am, and I'll finish there.
Lovely, thank you, Wendy. That was a gallop through an amazing career, and still going.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks to all our speakers, really great talks. So now we turn over to the questions from the audience. So I'm just looking, there's a couple, I'm going to start with the questions that came in for Angela. So there's a couple of questions around the cybersecurity, and we've got a comment from Muffy Calder, who says thank you very much for the talk, and that she always fails captchas. So you said a lot about the things that weren't working in cybersecurity. What would a good solution look like, especially given that we're building our system? We've got a lot of legacy software around. And there was another question as well that seemed related. Yes, so somebody also asked, can you give us examples where this has been done well, i.e. good security, and also good user experience?
Okay, yes, first of all, hi Muffy. Really the captures, it's just very, you know, it's first of all, it's like you're putting the load not onto the people who have the problem, right? The service providers have a problem with the bots, and they should be looking at to employ technical solutions to stop the bots, or basically set up things so it becomes just too much work for the attackers to create an open bot accounts. It's very difficult to answer quickly, but if for those who know a little bit about the problem, is what we're seeing here. This is a fallout from not really having good identity and access management in most organizations, you know, and that's, I think it's as true for the customer facing side of things as it is for internal systems in many companies. So I absolutely agree that it is harder to do with legacy systems, but if you look very carefully, you'll find that there are providers some of the big providers who are born digital certainly don't use use CAPTCHAs at all, or use them very, very rarely in exception situations, where there's others, you know, where you constantly, the first thing you do before you can look at even what the company is offering you, or before you can create an account, you first of all get like stopped, you know, stopped in your tracks. So the answer is it really depends on what you're doing, but there are technical solutions. And if you want to, and if you, again, the NCSC's website on this basically presents a whole set of technical options there are, and using the right combination of that means you don't pile everything just by creating this massive hurdle at the front for the user. So that's the CAPTCHA answer. What is good? Somebody asked, what is good? What do good security solutions look like?
That have good user experience as well.
Good user experience. They are. We've seen in authentication things have moved, and we are actually seeing. We are seeing a very low effort and pleasant security experiences in the area, basically biometrics. Many of the security solutions on the smartphones, you know, you can actually see that banks are actually actively pushing their customers to do online banking on the phones rather than doing it on the desktop, because they have an environment where they can make it very low effort and can make it part of the overall experiences, you know, and you can't on a smartphone people experience smart and clever solutions, you know, and if you look at that, how it's managed, for instance, access to gaming, to various platforms like that, it isn't a huge malarkey, and they do think, even, you know, not that I want to encourage anybody to do betting, but most of those companies, they have to do very, very stringent checks for identity and person, and they manage to do it in a way that's not hugely disruptive to their users. It's as some American colleagues have found, it's really in, you know, the more if a company is aware that people are paying with their own money, you find they make the investment to make security an efficient and pleasant user experience, and showing that it's possible to do it. It's just in large sectors at the moment, they don't care. Can I also answer the question from John Blythe here? Can you share some insights around how to encourage senior stakeholders and boards to be more people-centric in their thinking? That's because that is an excellent question. I really think I think we're seeing not enough involvement of senior stakeholders in this. You know, you need to go in there and change the habit, you know, change these like not very effective habits at the moment of how security is designed. And you need to disrupt processes, and you need to bring the security specialists together with the people who design the workflows and the business, and you have to get them to work together to come up with those smooth experiences. And that kind of, it very often doesn't happen because people are worried about stepping outside the area of competence. And that's also what you see particularly around technology, that sometimes the senior stakeholders don't want to get involved in security because they think it's deeply technical, and so they're scared of it. Whereas actually what it is, it's really about getting the right capabilities and capacities in a company to work together in order to create a solution that works well within the company and for the customers outside. And that's really often a leadership problem. So I think the biggest problems we see is when the senior stakeholders shy away from getting involved in security.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to choose something that's a little bit more open now, and this is for all of the speakers. So we have a couple of questions that are around advice. So what advice would you give to female students thinking about a career in computing science? And somebody also asks about a similar sort of thing. What would you encourage people to do in terms of A-levels? What advice would you give to A-level students? Do you think that girls should study computer science at A-level? What should they do to study cyber security? So those things are all related. Jess, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I was once a first year, well, I was never a first year computing student actually, but I was a student taking a first year computing course in my second year of undergrad. And now I teach first year computing students. So I can attack that one first, maybe. I think the most important piece of advice I would, and I try to get to my students as well, is that it's important not to be scared. So we're doing computing science here, right? We're writing code in probably a sandbox. So if your code doesn't compile or your code doesn't run or you do something wrong, all that happens is that it hasn't worked correctly. And I think it's really easy to be paralyzed by feeling like you don't know how to do the thing that you want to know how to do, especially if you're sitting in a class and you look around you and everyone looks different to you. And it's full of people who've been doing computing since they were 10 years old and programming things since they were children, because I felt that way. And they're not as scared of not being able to do something because they already feel like they can do it. But I think that kind of fear is just, it's an impediment. And getting used to not being able to do the thing and then trying 3 more times and then you can do the thing. I think that's really important. That's like a superpower that helps you learn introductory computing and loads of other things. If I can answer separately the question about whether girls should study computing science at A-level, of course I think they should, but of course I do. I guess a thing to think about when you're considering this in particular, should girls study computing science? If you look around, I mean, especially this year, but all the time, like half the infrastructure of our world is made by computing. Even in regular years, I see my mom via computing because she lives in Canada. I make medical appointments over computing. Roads are routed via computing. Optimization is done via computing. Your whole world is computing. I interact through the world with computing. And do I want to leave somebody else to build that? No, right? I don't want to leave it up to somebody else to know about how my world is going to work and exclude myself from learning about that or from building it. So I think, yeah, build your own world, understand how it works, study computing.
Fabulous. Wendy, can I turn that over to you now? Very mindful of the fact that you didn't do a computing degree either.
Well, that's because I'm so old, they didn't exist in those days. So I have no idea whether I would have. I actually wanted to be a medic, if you really want to. I've told this story many times, but my headmistress wouldn't let me because she said very firmly, Wendy, medicine is not a career for women. That was in 1969 when it wasn't. So she may have been right. And I hated her at the time, but it may be I've had a more spectacular career as a computer scientist than I would have done as a medic if I'd been training back in the 70s. Who knows? But I think, I can't really answer it better than Jess did in a way. I think we have a huge issue around computing generally. I'm doing a lot of work. We're trying to get computer science recognized as a proper science and not just something that you learn because you've got to learn you need to be digitally literate. We're trying to, Rebecca, just so you know, I think I copied you on this. I was talking to Julia Adamson at the BCS about this because the BCS is leading a lot on computing and schools work. It's so important that we get schools, teachers, parents recognizing computing as a subject to be studied, not just as in the context of digital literacy, and I think that would make it more, if we can. That's so important for society, I think, but that would also, I think, make the people that go on to university to read computing more diverse, because you'd be seeing it as something that had true intellectual stretch as well as really, really important for the world. And as Jess said, I don't want people, I don't want the world that I have to interact with being written by people that don't include people like me. So you know, so it's you know, that's where I'm putting my efforts these days. It's the same with AI, that we have AI, as I said today, is really, it's a lot of hard sums and a lot of extreme coding, and but there's much more to AI than that, and it's so important to society that we get the development of AI systems is taken as a subject which we put all our efforts in to make it something that is that is for the good of humanity, and not some, you know, systems that are built by a very small subset of people that aren't anything like us, maybe. Or it also, I take diversity in its widest sense then. So that's where I'm putting my efforts, and I you know, what can you say? I think there is no, at the moment, there really is no better career to go in than computing. It's got so many different aspects to it. It's where the money is and is going to be. It's where the skills gap is. You know, why wouldn't you? if you know, there's my answer, but it doesn't actually work, because culturally, the brightest of the students are not encouraged to go into computing. Right, and that includes a lot of the girls too, whether they think it's you know, a good place to be or not. It's not thought of as where the brightest of the bright go, and that's what I want to achieve.
Can I be mean and push you a little bit on that, Wendy? Because how do we get around that problem? Because I think I absolutely agree that we're not pushing the brightest people to go into computer science. So how do we change that? How do we make it clear at schools or in society that, as Jess said earlier, computing matters? Well,
because I think we make it a proper subject, not something. So I had a letter, I don't know if she's listening or not, from someone, I'm not going to name her, as parent. She's works in the city, has a daughter who wants to do GCSE computer science. She was one of the few girls at her school to do computer science, because it was put in the creative arts section of options, and so it was put against drama as an option. And she's the only girl in the class, and you know, and when they ask people, should she do computing, the answer is, why would she want to do computing? Who wants to study computing? So the way I think we have to tackle it is by getting it accepted. And we, you know, in the UK, we are actually quite far ahead with this, but the curricula aren't good enough. The teachers, we haven't got enough teachers that understand the subject. They're often borrowed from other subjects to teach computing, and the government has put a lot of money into this, and the BCS is you know, leading one of the three, I can't remember, they have they are stakeholders in the computing in schools scheme, and I really think we've got to push on that and get it accepted as a proper subject, like a science, so people, so we do get, and because, you know, that's where we don't just want people to be programmers. We want lots of programmers, but we don't just want people to be programmers. It's a much bigger subject than that.
Yeah.
So I really think that's the way to push, but I've been at this a long time and singularly failed to shift the dial. So, and if anyone asks me to be a role model, or I get so fed up with this, oh dear.
But you already are a role model, Wendy. You don't have a choice about that one. So can I ask Jess or Angela, have you got thoughts on that, about how we change that public view of computing to show that computing matters? Angela?
I'm not sure it's a question that, you know, that really many people think it doesn't matter. I think what we really need is I think there's more the hurdle of like getting, you know, that it somehow doesn't seem attractive. And I think partly it's a chicken and egg situation, you know. So if you basically look at a profession where there isn't a lot of diversity, you know, that then doesn't tend to attract people from diverse backgrounds into it, because you can't see yourself in it, you know, because I think quite rightly also people are worried, and you know, whether they will really be able to fit in, you know. And as for instance, I did for a few years work at the Royal Academy of Engineering on its diversity activities, you know, and still, I was still stunned how often you came across, you know, the more, you know, the establishment in there then reacting, you know, and saying if you had people of more diversity, that the only reason they were there and had succeeded was because they were diverse, but not because they were any good as engineers, you know. And I think that's just awful, you know. And that is, you know, that really doesn't help. So I think, I mean, I've more and more come to the conclusion that positive experience, that you can do something, are very essential steps, you know, of actually getting people involved, getting young people involved more, and getting people from other areas to actually realize they can really make a contribution and can bring the field on. And I think, as you know, in many ways, as Wendy has described it, I think computer science has actually been a really open and welcoming discipline. I mean, you know, Wendy came in from a different area. I came in from, as you said, occupational psychology. You know, I was just fascinated by why it was so hard for people to learn to use computers, and you know, and I realized, I mean, in a sort of fit of inspiration, sort of realized that sitting in the psychology department and complaining about it wasn't going to change anything. That the only way of changing it was by getting involved. And I think that is it. So we need to provide more opportunity for people to make positive experiences of being able to do something. That's it. And to really get rid of some of them. I think there is still sometimes a bit of a snobbishness, which Wendy also described quite well. You know, that theoretical work is and theoretical research is somehow better than applied, you know, applied research, and that kind of yeah, I think that is, you know, if we find more venues, whether it is by bringing young people into universities and work environments and giving them positive experiences. I remember I had a supervisor when I did my PhD, and he was really interested in it, and every year we'd bring in groups of schoolgirls and their teachers to basically get their hands on computers and to try out anything from databases to graphics to just to actually see, oh, I can do this, you know, and there's things I can do here, which is not like the stuff I see the boys doing when they're sitting by themselves and hogging the computer. I'm horribly stereotyping, of course, so I said this. Sorry. I asked it. So I think that's it. Whether we do it by bringing people into universities or by universities reaching out more, we've got this video technology now, you know, and I remember still in the early 90s when I worked under Peter Kirstein, that one of the things we did is that we had scientists working with school classes, having these kind of video sessions, you know, explaining what we do together with the teachers, setting them little tasks, and then they would report back on what they had done. So I think with a bit of creativity and by bringing in the experts for pedagogy and learning, we could achieve a lot more.
The trouble is the damage is done a lot before they get to applying for university. The culture is set. Universities, of course, have to do their bit to make it a welcoming subject and seen to be diverse in its approach to everything. But so much is done at the schools and in the family.
Yeah, but we were basically having 11 and 12-year-olds. We were doing this classes with 11 and 12-year-olds, not the ones who were closer to applying. But I agree, the earlier on we do it, the earlier on we reach out and get them involved, the better.
Because I was going to pick up on that point too, Wendy, that, you know, oftentimes when I talk to young people about their careers, I say to them, how did you get to be here? Nearly always they say, well, there was this teacher. there is this teacher. And the comment you made earlier, Wendy, about, you know, how confident teachers feel, particularly in secondary education, teaching computing, is just key. Because where you have inspirational teachers, you will get inspired pupils. So we need to, I think we really need to invest more. We are investing there, but we need to invest more.
So I have a bit of an inside line that I know that Jess has done a wee bit of that. I don't know if you were going to say anything about that, Jess.
I was actually going to throw in a plea for counting, kind of counting computing as computing where we find it. So I worked with previous organizations that did lots of outreach to try and persuade more girls especially, but any underrepresented group into computing. And one of the things that we perennially did is we do these activities and then ask, you know, follow up later and be like, what girls did subsequently. And, you know, many of them would not do computing and instead would go and do mathematics or would do computer engineering. That was the big one. Computer engineering was stealing all of our potential good students. And this was kind of considered failure at this particular organization. And that, it just feels mad, right? Like, I think that when you compare computing science to, like, this is perhaps a slightly different setting because in Canada, engineer is a reserved word and it's a separate governed profession. But kind of trading off computing science against computer engineering or highly mathematical, highly computational mathematics. I think those people are also, in an important sense, doing computing. I think there are people in computing who are computing scientists. And I think that's a shame, and we should.
Thank you. Lots of different views there.
Can I pick up on one of the comments that's come in? Someone's talking about Angela Hayes talking about tiny children doing programming in Silicon Valley. Tiny children do programming in the UK as well. In fact, one of the things that Michael Gove, when he changed the whole curriculum, was to make sure kids do computing, right, at in primary schools as well. The problem comes, and this Angela said, go for the children at 11, 12. The problem comes when the hormones kick in. Seriously, when girls realize they're girls, and that's where the cultural things kick in. So you can have been enthusiastically doing programming up until that point, and then the world tells you actually you should be, what was that advert up recently, a ballet dancer or a it's the stereotypical that it's peer group, it's parents. If you haven't got a parent who encourages you to do science or computing or any subject like that, then it's much harder for girls to kick the stereotype. And it's so important that the teachers get it, because if the teachers, I mean, look at that school where computing was scheduled against creative arts or as part of creative arts. So, you know, most of the girls will go to the drama course or whatever, because the peer pressure takes them that way. And that's the problem, that it's at that's the age where things start to you know, you start worrying about what people think about you when the hormones kick in. Which is why it's really important interface for the universities to. I will say one thing though. I always remember this. Jill Lovegrove and I did a lot of courses. I don't know if any of you remember Jill Lovegrove. She ended up in Newcastle, I think. But we did a lot of courses in the early like late 80s, early 90s. We had a lot of we invited 13, 14-year-olds, I think, girls to the university to show them what computing was, and we did before and after surveys, and they all said before they came they didn't know what computing was, and after they left they knew what computing was, but they didn't want to study computing at university. So it put us off doing that for a while. You have to really get your courses right to make sure you have the right impact, but that was a long time ago.
I'm sure that's still happening today.
Who knows? But yeah,
I wanted to take something that you just said there, Wendy, about not listening to what other people say, and to bring us onto a question about day-to-day microaggressions. because I think one of the things that came out of all of your talks was that you've all had people saying to you, that's crazy, why do you want to do that? And you've clearly ignored those people and gone ahead and been really successful anyway, right? And so what techniques have you got? I mean, other than just presumably sheer stubbornness, you know, what have you got that helps boost your own feeling that you are doing the right thing and those folk can bugger off? Who would like to start?
Well, I don't mind. I mean, of course I'll start. I've mentioned it in my talk. Mentors are hugely important, and that sounds very formal. I've never had a formal mentor, but people to talk to who've been there before you, who will give you trust to give you good advice, or yeah. And they don't have to be women all the time. My first mentor really was my head of department, who was David Barron, first head of computing at Southampton, and he got what I was trying to do and encouraged me to do it. Otherwise, I probably would have given up computing, actually, I think, at that point, if he hadn't encouraged me. Because I wasn't actually that interested in writing compilers and operating systems. I wanted to be doing stuff with people. Don't ask me why I enjoy pure mathematics. That's a whole other thing. But so I would absolutely say you have to have. My husband also has been a huge support to me throughout my entire career. Pick your partner wisely. You really need a supportive partner or friends. It's everything.
Absolutely.
I have two tools that I'd like to mention that I like to deploy. Karen has seen one of them before. I have a really good glare, where just if someone says something that's just ridiculous, which happens occasionally, not very often these days, but sort of with a little head tilt, I find that's very effective. Just a prolonged silence. Because if somebody, for example, if somebody makes a joke that is not a good joke, not just a bad joke, but you know, an inappropriate joke, I find sort of a prolonged silence, then they start needing to explain themselves. They feel the need to break the silence and explain, oh, I just meant I didn't mean that you were, and I think that kind of makes them aware that what they've said is something that needs explaining, then perhaps they ought not to have said it. So I found that to be effective. The other thing in the last couple of years that I've found has helped me with these is that I'm trying to notice microaggressions about other groups. So I'm very aware that I'm sort of, you know, I have, as we say, all but one bit of privilege, right? Like I'm a white, essentially middle class, native English speaking, colonizer, you know, all of these things. I have all but one bit of privilege, and that's that I'm not male, and it's a shame that that's a privilege in our world, but it is right now. So I've been trying to be better at watching out for microaggressions against my colleagues who have fewer bits of privilege than me, and calling out microaggressions against them. And doing that better has let me be better at noticing the ones that only apply to my one bit of missing privilege. And the fact that I notice them more, I think, means I take them to heart less. So I think it's often the case that we're better at helping out our colleagues with things than we are at doing that thing for ourselves. And definitely for me, trying to notice microaggressions against other people has helped me notice ones against myself as well. So I recommend that if you get a chance. And as a side benefit, you make the world a better place for other people.
Angela, did you want to come in there?
I was just thinking, I was just having some asides here with people, with people I did work with early on in my career, and I have to say, basically, you know, pick your collaborators wisely, and I think you can actually find them. You know, there are other researchers out there, other people in your university departments who really want to solve problems and who look, you know, who are looking for complementary skills. So I was just having some exchanges with John Crowcroft, who I worked with at UCL in the early 90s, and also some exchanging his message with David Deuce, you know, the kind of, I mean, that was a really the early 90s when Wendy was talking about, you know, the early days of the web, and sort of around that was all the early days of the real-time multimedia stuff, which is what I worked on. And you know, I looked, all the stuff we're doing now today was based, you know, was created in that, you know, in that period of time. And I think it's an interesting story that's it's taken a long time to really come to fruition and be used very, very widely. But now, during the COVID epidemic, it's been an absolute, you know, it's been an absolute company saver and livelihood saver for a lot of people. And David actually made the point, it's like, you know, maybe that is a story we could also basically show, you know, that, you know, we're not just creating this for fickleness and fun. We're creating things, you know, that actually it is a new infrastructure. This is the fifth utility, you know, and it really enables all our lives. And it's something that, you know, and it will, I think healthcare is always another area that I find hugely inspiring in this area, you know, huge advantage, huge increases, you know, and leaps in cancer treatment and various other areas, you know, they wouldn't have been possible without the computing work being done, image processing, without the AI Wendy was talking about, the machine learning stuff we use today. And I think when people become more conscious of that, hopefully that will inspire more, you know, inspire more of them to get involved. I think we need to maybe go out and talk more about it. And I had to learn the hard way just how long it sometimes takes for the research to get out there and really make a difference. You know, I used to be really impatient in my past, and I used to think I'd failed, you know, because and you know, and I think I failed because it takes 20 or 25 years for your work to, even in an area like tech, you know, sometimes to really work through for that paradigm shift that you've worked on to really arrive out there in practice.
Thank you very much. It's 27 minutes past 5, so I think I'm going to bring it to a close now. There are still some questions in the Q&A to be answered. I would encourage the speakers, if they would like to type an answer to those questions, then you can, if you've been asked a direct question. So I would just like to say thank you very much to all of the speakers. I feel like I've learned a huge amount in the last hour and a half. I love that Angela was bringing out the importance of people and how we build our systems, and that we can't separate out those two things. I loved that Jess has taken a very theoretical area and applied it to something that's turned about to be extremely important this year. And I love that Wendy has that faith of her ideas. I think that's a really important message to take away, that you need to have faith in your ideas, and don't let other people tell you that those are not things that you can follow. And clearly, I'm going to say, Wendy, that you've probably turned out okay, even though you didn't do the medics. Kind of, you know, you didn't follow that career as a medic. It's hard to see how you would have been more successful, right?
True. And my support system's about to come in and bring me a cup of tea.
Oh, that is even better. So I think
downtrodden males.
Those talks have all been really, really good. And I think the questions have been excellent, that have raised some important issues for us. There's so much that we can't really talk about in this session today. But please do continue that conversation on. If I could point you at the BCS podcast, which Brian will remind me what it's called. It's something to do with gems.
It's the gem of all mechanisms.
Thank you, Brian. So follow up on that. That is a great place to continue that conversation. There will also be materials from this on the BCS YouTube channel, and also on the events and lectures part of the website. Thank you very much to BCS, and particularly Brian Runciman and Pam Fagan and Maxine Leslie and Julia Adamson for making this possible. You know, we couldn't do it without you, and I think it's a really important part of the BCS charter that, you know, we're out here saying actually there are women doing really amazing computing stuff, and that is totally part of Karen Spärck Jones's legacy that we're trying to really propagate. I think I'm going to just round that off with saying, if you're not already involved in the BCS Women Lovelace Colloquium, if you're an undergraduate student, write your abstract. They're due in January. Get onto that. It's a great thing to do. And to finish with the quote that everybody makes from Karen Spärck Jones, that computing is too important to be left to men. And we can apply that to all sorts of diversity approaches, right? It's too important to be left to one particular group, that we need to all be involved. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.